So I'm here to talk to you guys about the sport of pickleball, obviously, but where it is, where it's going, the growth of it, and I'll give you some tips and tricks that maybe you can apply on the courts and maybe help with keeping you that #1 status in all your leagues. So where's pickleball? Does anybody know when or where pickleball started?
Bainbridge Island, Washington.
And do you know what year?
1965.
You guys are good. So it started in Bainbridge Island, 1965, by 3 dads with bored kids. They needed to keep them entertained. And from there, the sport has grown because people fall in love with it. One of the main reasons the sport has grown since 1965 is USA Pickleball has 2,000 ambassadors across the country. They're all volunteers. They're all banging on the Parks and Rec's doors asking for more courts. So that's one of the main reasons it's grown from 1965. Today, it's projected that we are going to be at 5 million pickleball players across the country, which is about a 20% increase over last year, which is just phenomenal. To put it in perspective, though, tennis, the sport of tennis, which is pickleball is obviously compared to tennis quite often, there's 21 million tennis players currently in the country. So while pickleball is growing, we still have kind of a long runway and a long way to go. But I did hear one stat that I wanted to share with you because I found it so interesting. Anecdotally, some people think that in 10 years, the sport of pickleball could be at 40 million people. So 5 million today, 40 million in 10 years. And thinking about it, I mean, I think it's true of all of us. If we get on the court, we want to share it. If everybody shares it with one person, and then those people go and share it with one person, I mean, 40 million, it sounds very lofty, but I think it is quite possible. So 5 million people playing today. What do those people look like? I got some numbers for you just to break it down. 75% of people play way more now than when they first started, which I think speaks to how addicting the sport is. I know I am certainly in that category. How many people play tournaments? I know we talked about leagues. How many people play tournaments? That's about indicative of what we're seeing. 60% of pickleball players will play in 0 or just 1 tournament. So it speaks to how much the sport is a recreational sport rather than a competitive sport. And that's the same with ratings. If you look at ratings, most people have a 3.0 rating or don't even have a rating. So people are playing recreationally to be a part of a community for something, exercise, but also social, not just to be out there being competitive. Pickleball has historically, I think we all know, been a senior game. That's how it's evolved over the years. But it's trending younger. So right now, 60% of people that play 8 or more times a year are over the age of 55, which I think maybe retirement has something to do with that, more time to play. But what I think is very interesting is the casual players. 80% of casual players which play 7 or less times a year are under the age of 55. So the sport is growing, but it's growing especially at the younger generations, which I think is pretty powerful for the longevity of the sport of pickleball. And one last stat, unfortunately, women, the males have us outpaced on the pickleball court, 60% male, 40% female. Yes, boo. Not for long. Yeah, that women's power pickleball league is going to be taking over, so watch out, guys. So what's driving this growth? What's driving these trends? Does anybody have any ideas they want to throw out? I'll give you my thoughts on it.
It's fun.
It's fun. I think, so the sport itself, I think really speaks to the growth because #1, it's accessible. Regardless of your age, regardless of your skill level, regardless of gender, whatever, for as cheap as $25, I can get a paddle, jump on a court, have a rally, and have some fun. The sport is so accessible, and I think that's the #1 thing for the growth of the game. The other thing we're really seeing is some crazy money being pumped into our sport. There's a bunch of pickleball businesses, but it's particularly pickleball events and tours. So pickleball is growing, but it's growing at all sorts of socioeconomic levels. And that means people at the top are investing in the sport, which basically translates to exposure and eyeballs, which is fueling the sport. So I'll give you an example. Has anybody heard of Major League Pickleball? Has anybody heard of that? So this was a new concept this year. It happened about a month ago. They raised $1 million for one event. They put that into huge public relations. They put it on CBS Sports, which is a major sports outlet. And so you're starting to see pickleball on this mainstream broadcast. We also have 2 pro tours that launched in the last 2 years doing the same thing. Tons of money being pumped into the game. It's on Fox Sports, CBS Sports. It's all over your social media, which is really great. All this investment is just going to continue to fuel the growth of the game. Pickleball is also getting traction in the world of celebrities. Celebrities are just like us. They love pickleball too. So from Leonardo DiCaprio, George Clooney, Reese Witherspoon, they're all out there playing and pushing that into their huge followers, which again is, I think, trending younger. They have a huge younger demographic following, which helps fuel the growth of the sport. And all of this publicity, and I'm not sure if you guys saw, but pickleball was picked up by Vanity Fair. It was a great segment on the Today Show, live with Kelly and Ryan, and this is just in the past few months. So this great national exposure is really driving the growth of the game. And lastly, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but pickleball has an incredible grassroots phenomenon. So it starts, I mentioned the ambassadors for USA Pickleball, but you don't have to be an official ambassador, and I know you kind of touched on it earlier today. We're all ambassadors for the game. We're all talking about it. We're all inviting people to play. We're all have that honor of taking on the growth of the game, which is wonderful. And then on top of us individually as ambassadors for the sport, clubs and communities like Coral Lakes, Delray, I'm a member of the Delray Beach Pickleball Club. We all want to have events and tournaments, and we're promoting it in our local communities, and that growth is fueling the growth in itself. Does anybody have any idea how many pickleball tournaments there's going to be next year across the country? Want to take a guess? About 1,000. There's going to be about 1,000 pickleball tournaments. That doesn't count leagues or round robins. That's proper pickleball tournaments. It's going to be about 1,000 next year, which I think is about a 20 to 25% growth, just like the sport of pickleball itself. And lastly, on a local level, I know we don't have any in our neck of the woods, but there's these pickleball dedicated restaurants and bars popping up. So think like a Topgolf or a Drive Shack, but instead of a driving range, it is pickleball courts.
Oh my God.
So this started with Chicken and Pickle, I believe, in the Midwest, but there's similar concepts from Austin to Boston and everywhere in between. And I think that is something to watch for the younger generations, right? They like to go out, have a drink, do something, and they get to have, exactly. But they get to do pickleball, and it's really targeted towards those active lifestyle folks, which is incredible. So huge national presence, the major tours, the big media outlets, but we also have this hyper-local presence. Everybody wants to do their own part to build their own pickleball community in their backyard, which I think is just one amazing recipe for success.